Okay, imagine a single individual conquering more than twice as much land as anyone else in human history. We're talking about a man who started out with absolutely nothing and went on to forge an empire so incredibly vast that it literally reshaped the genetic, cultural, and political makeup of our entire planet. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we've got a truly fascinating journey ahead of us as we deconstruct the mechanics behind the world's largest contiguous empire. We are looking at the ultimate blueprint of a universal ruler, the man history remembers as Genghis Khan. We're going to explore exactly what his leadership secrets were, how his unprecedented merit-based rise to power allowed him to build this massive empire, the terrifying brilliance of his war tactics and military victories, and ultimately his highly controversial legacy. It is an absolutely wild story of strategy, survival, and just sheer force of will.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Temujin's grueling rise, uncover his merit and leadership secrets, break down his unbeatable war tactics, look at the global trade and empire he created, and wrap up with his controversial legacy.
Section 1. Temujin's grueling rise, forged in fire. To really understand the ruler, we have to first look at the unforgiving reality of the Mongolian grasslands. 1162. That is a year that would quite literally change the map of the world, because in 1162, a boy named Temujin was born. Now, it's a name you might not immediately recognize, but to understand his journey, you have to picture the environment he was born into. Imagine the 12th century Mongolian steppes. We are talking about endless, desolate grasslands, freezing, brutal winters where temperatures plummet way below zero. It was a world defined by constant, violent tribal warfare, where nomadic groups fought desperately just to secure scarce resources. He wasn't born a wealthy king in some fortified castle with walls to protect him. He was born into severe vulnerability, where every single day was a battle against the elements and rival clans.
You know, this is the ultimate zero-to-hero narrative, but it started with absolute tragedy. Temujin's early life was just defined by unimaginable hardships. When he was just a young boy, his father was actually poisoned by a rival tribe. And after that devastating loss, his own family was completely abandoned by their community, just left out in the harsh wilderness to die. His childhood was filled with gnawing hunger, deep betrayal. To survive, his family had to forage for wild roots and hunt field mice on the steppes. At one point, he was even captured and enslaved by a rival clan and forced to wear a heavy wooden collar before finally making a daring escape. But the really crucial takeaway here is that these severe traumas didn't break him. Instead of dying out there in the wilderness, he learned the ultimate value of self-reliance and alliance. This brutal hardship was literally the forge that hammered him into a hardened, extraordinary leader.
Moving right along to Section 2, Merit and Leadership Secrets, A New Way to Rule. Now, what's really interesting about this is how a marginalized, outcast young man actually managed to unite all these scattered, warring tribes into one singular force. It all comes down to his revolutionary approach to leadership. See, for centuries, traditional rule on the steppes was basically dictated by fear. Leaders promoted people based almost entirely on their aristocratic family status or their bloodlines. If you were born into the right family, you led. If you weren't, well, you served. But Temujin flipped that script entirely. He introduced something called the no-core system, which essentially means comrade or companion. Instead of ruling through fear and aristocracy, he actively rewarded loyalty above all else. He promoted warriors entirely on their skill, their bravery, and their merit, totally regardless of who their parents were. Imagine a modern corporate takeover where the new CEO doesn't fire the rival executives, but actually promotes the absolute smartest, most capable people from the rival company to run his own teams. That's exactly what Temujin did. By using this strict, merit-based system, he shattered the old social dynamics and made everyone feel invested in a shared success. Because of these leadership secrets, for the very first time in history, the Mongols stopped fighting each other and actually fought together as one unstoppable, unified nation.
Section 3. Unbeatable War Tactics, Unleashing the Horde. So his timeline begins with his birth as Temujin in 1162, but the true turning point comes in the year 1206. This is the year his massive unification efforts culminated in a monumental event called a Kurultai, which is basically a great council of all the Mongolian chieftains. And it was here that he was officially granted a brand new legendary title, Genghis Khan, roughly translating to the oceanic or universal ruler. And the literal weight of that name gave his leadership this sense of divine mandate. From a boy abandoned on the steppes, hunting mice, to the universal ruler of all the people who lived in felt tents. This title marked the beginning of his outward expansion, a relentless military campaign that would last all the way until his death in 1227, right at the absolute peak of his empire's power.
So how exactly did he achieve such mind-boggling military victories? Well, Genghis Khan unleashed an army unlike anything the world had ever seen. They acted way more like a highly coordinated modern military than a medieval horde. The strategy was incredibly innovative. First off, his primary force was made up of highly mobile horse archers. These guys practically lived in the saddle. They could ride for days on end without stopping. In really desperate times, they'd even make small incisions in their horses' veins to drink their blood for sustenance on the move. They wielded composite bows with an incredibly high draw weight that could pierce armor from staggering distances. Second, they attacked with overwhelming speed. They'd communicate across the battlefield using flags and horns, which let them coordinate complex maneuvers in total silence. And third, they were absolute masters of psychological warfare. They famously used this feigned retreat tactic, where they would pretend to panic and flee, drawing the enemy out of their defensive formations, only to suddenly turn around, encircle them, and wipe them out before they even knew what hit them. It was a fluid, lightning-fast style of warfare that just completely devastated traditional, slower-moving armies.
And the sheer scale of the conquest was staggering. Powerful kingdoms just fell one by one to these unbreakable tactics. His forces swept relentlessly through northern China and totally dominated Central Asia. A prime example of this terrifying efficiency is the fall of the Khwarazmian Empire. See, Genghis Khan actually initially sought a trade alliance with them and sent peaceful ambassadors. But the Khwarazmian governor made a fatal mistake. He executed the Mongol trade ambassadors. In retaliation, Genghis Khan unleashed an apocalyptic level of destruction. He diverted rivers to flood their cities and systematically wiped the entire empire off the map. This sent a chilling message across the globe. Entire cities just started surrendering at the mere mention of his name, knowing full well that cooperation meant a chance to live, but resisting the Khan meant facing absolute total destruction.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. Global trade and empire, connecting the continents.
By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had established the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Contiguous just meaning all the land territories were physically connected in one unbroken stretch. We're talking about roughly 11 to 12 million square miles of land. To put that massive scale into perspective, imagine a single governing body, a single legal code controlling everything from the sandy beaches of modern-day Korea all the way to the dense forests of Poland. It's a geographical footprint that's almost hard to wrap your head around today, uniting vast landscapes and incredibly diverse populations under one banner. But what actually happened within those massive borders once the dust settled? Paradoxically, his brutal conquests birthed what historians call the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, essentially a new golden age. To manage this colossal territory, he built a huge communication network called the Yam system. Think of it like a medieval Pony Express, a series of relay stations spanning the empire that let messages cross continents in mere days. Under Mongol control, ancient trade routes were fiercely protected. This allowed merchants to travel safely across vast distances. He even introduced paper money to standardize commerce and granted strict religious freedom to keep his diverse subjects happy. With merchants came a huge exchange of ideas, cultures, and crucial inventions like gunpowder and the compass. Ultimately, Genghis Khan's reign led directly to the revitalization of the Silk Road. In many ways, he laid the groundwork for the early internet of trade and ideas, letting commerce flow safely across continents in a way that just had never been possible before. Finally, Section 5, a controversial legacy, the two faces of the Khan. History views Genghis Khan through two very different lenses, and to assess his legacy, we really have to look impartially at both extremes. On one side, he is remembered as a ruthless conqueror, a man whose armies brought widespread destruction and death to millions who dared resist him. Interestingly, some modern researchers even point out that his conquests temporarily reduced the Earth's carbon footprint, simply due to the massive depopulation of vast regions. But on the other side, he's recognized as a profound visionary. He was a leader who united endlessly warring nations based on merit. He outlawed kidnapping and torture within his ranks, and he entirely transformed global trade. By linking the East and the West, he created the geopolitical borders and cultural exchange systems that effectively built the modern world. Genghis Khan remains one of history's most influential figures exactly because of this stark, undeniable contrast. Which leaves us with this final, profound question to consider. Do the ends of a connected world justify the ruthless means of its creation? It's a question that forces us to look deeply at how our own modern world was built and the heavy price paid for the globalization we experience today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on the incredible, brutal, and brilliant blueprint of Genghis Khan. Keep questioning, keep learning,